Before the horse race began, the owner panicked as his horse darted off the track, following a strange girl. He called the police, and when they found the horse standing calmly next to the girl, everyone was stunned. "No, this can't be happening. Not now," Chuck muttered under his breath, pacing nervously along the edge of the racetrack. His anxious gaze darted toward Pegasus, the magnificent black thoroughbred who carried not just Chuck's dreams, but almost all his money. Today was the big race, the one Chuck had staked everything on. Weeks of tireless training had turned Pegasus into a nearly flawless competitor. The murmurs around the track confirmed what Chuck already knew. Pegasus was the favorite, the one to watch. Chuck had spent days reassuring every bettor who would listen, promising them that Pegasus would deliver. His outward demeanor was calm, his tone self-assured, but deep inside, the weight of his anxiety was almost unbearable. He stood among a group of bettors, attempting to project confidence. "Today, we're going to witness greatness," he said with a forced smile, each word fighting against the rising tide of doubt in his chest. But then, from the corner of his eye, he caught something unusual. Pegasus, typically calm and composed, began to paw the dirt frantically, shaking his head in an agitated rhythm. A cold wave of dread swept over Chuck. "What's wrong?" he wondered, his eyes locking onto the horse as he tried to decipher the cause of this erratic behavior. Pegasus's ears twitched, his head turning sharply toward the entryway as if he sensed something or someone approaching. Chuck followed the horse's gaze, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The stands were filling with spectators, buzzing with excitement for the race about to begin. Then, chaos erupted. With a sharp, piercing neigh, Pegasus reared onto his hind legs, drawing gasps and startled cries from the onlookers nearby. "Settle down, Pegasus!" Chuck shouted, his voice tinged with both fear and desperation. He moved toward the horse, hands outstretched in a calming gesture. Stable hands rushed in to assist, but Pegasus was too strong, his powerful frame straining against their grip. Whispers and murmurs rippled through the crowd. "This horse is out of control," someone muttered. But Chuck knew better. Pegasus had always been gentle, so attuned to him, it was almost as though the horse could understand every word he said. This was something new, something beyond Chuck's comprehension. Amid the pandemonium, Pegasus's wild eyes focused on a figure moving near the fence. A young woman, no older than her early 20s, strolled casually, oblivious to the mounting tension. Her simple dress swayed as she walked, her dark curls tumbling loosely over her shoulders. She seemed out of place, moving with an air of tranquility that contrasted sharply with the rising chaos around her. Chuck's breath hitched as he spotted her, the world around him momentarily slowing. Pegasus let out a snort, straining against the ropes until they snapped, sending stable hands stumbling backward. "No! Stop him!" Chuck yelled, but it was too late. Pegasus vaulted over the fence, landing on the dirt track with a force that made the ground tremble. The crowd gasped in unison, frozen as the horse bolted straight for the woman. "Oh my God, he's going to trample her," Chuck thought, his heart hammering wildly. Yet the woman didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her serene expression unwavering as Pegasus closed the distance. When the horse was mere feet away, he skidded to a sudden stop, nostrils flaring, and lowered his head as though bowing. The woman extended a hand toward Pegasus's muzzle, her touch gentle, and the horse immediately stilled. The frenzy that had gripped him moments ago dissolved into a calm so profound it left Chuck and the onlookers stunned. "Who is she?" Chuck whispered, his mind reeling as he watched the scene unfold. He had never seen this woman before, yet Pegasus's reaction was unmistakable, as if he had known her his whole life. "Hey, Chuck, what's going on here?" One of the exhausted stable hands panted, his face red from exertion. Chuck barely heard him, his focus locked on the mysterious girl who had somehow tamed the untamable. "I don't know," Chuck muttered. "But it sure looks like she has something to do with it," he replied, his eyes fixed on the young woman. She had just leapt onto Pegasus's back with effortless grace. "Hey, girl, get down from there!" someone shouted from the stands, but she ignored them. With a slight nudge of her legs, she urged Pegasus into a turn. Before anyone could react, they bolted toward the racetrack's exit. The crowd froze, their gazes locked on the sight of Pegasus and the girl disappearing beyond the gates, leaving a swirling cloud of dust in their wake. Chuck stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at the lingering dust trail. Around him, murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some laughed nervously, others whipped out their phones to record what had happened, while a few enraged bettors shouted demands for answers. None of it registered with Chuck. His mind focused on one thing: Pegasus was gone, and he had no idea where. With trembling hands, Chuck pulled out his phone and dialed the police. "Good afternoon. I need help. My horse." "My race horse has been taken," he stammered, trying to sound composed, though his words spilled out in a rush. "No, it's not exactly theft. Well, yes, they took him without permission, but I don't understand. Please, you need to find him." As he explained the situation in greater detail, Chuck felt like time had stopped. Every second without news of Pegasus stretched endlessly, each moment heavy with anxiety. The operator's flat voice assured him that patrols would be dispatched, and they'd try to track the horse. But nothing calmed him. How could he explain that Pegasus hadn't just been taken? The horse had chosen to leave. And the girl, who was she? Searching for clarity, Chuck approached Jack, a longtime friend and stable hand. "Hey, did you see what happened?" he asked, hoping for a logical explanation. "I saw it all," Jack replied, scratching his head, his expression a mix of disbelief and concern. "Never seen Pegasus act like that. It's like he was searching for someone. And that girl? She knew exactly what she was doing." Chuck could only nod, his growing desperation tightening in his chest. "Pegasus doesn't behave like this, Jack. Something's going on. Something I can't make sense of." Just then, a police officer approached him. "Mr. Chuck, we've had reports of a black horse with a young woman headed toward downtown. We're sending patrols to that area," the officer said in a measured tone, trying to reassure him. Chuck thanked the officer, but the news only deepened his unease. Pegasus, running through city streets, a racehorse weaving through traffic? None of it made sense. Yet, deep down, Chuck couldn't shake the feeling that Pegasus's actions weren't random. The horse moved with a strange purpose, as if he knew exactly what he was doing. Minutes dragged by, each one feeling like an eternity. Chuck paced back and forth, clutching his phone, willing it to ring with good news. Finally, it buzzed. "Sir, we've received additional sightings. It seems the horse is headed out of the city, toward rural areas," the officer reported over the line. Chuck's stomach dropped. Rural areas meant Pegasus was moving farther away. But why out there? He murmured to himself. He wandered through the racetrack's parking lot, his steps heavy with desperation. Hours had passed without a solid lead on Pegasus or the mysterious girl. He'd spoken to the police, questioned the stable workers, even chased down rumors from bettors in the stands. But there was nothing. The sun dipped low behind the mountains, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson. With each passing moment, Chuck's hope of finding Pegasus dwindled. Out of nowhere, he felt a sharp tap on his shoulder. At first, Chuck thought he had accidentally bumped into someone due to his distraction. But when he turned his head, he saw a man of average height, wearing a worn-out baseball cap and a faded denim jacket. Before Chuck could say a word, the man leaned in slightly, as if preparing to apologize. Instead, he slipped a small, crumpled piece of paper into Chuck's hand and muttered, "Read this, but not here." Chuck froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing in curiosity and suspicion. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, but the man had already turned away, weaving quickly through the parked cars until he disappeared into the dim light of the parking lot. Chuck looked down at the note in his hand, debating whether to open it or toss it aside. But his curiosity and his determination to find Pegasus won out. Slowly, he unfolded the paper. The message was brief, written in rushed, uneven handwriting. "Meet me behind the stables in 30 minutes. Don't bring the cops." Chuck's brow furrowed as he read and reread the cryptic message. Something about it felt off, but if this was his only chance to gather information, no matter how slim, he couldn't let it slip away. He tucked the note into the pocket of his jacket, glancing around to ensure no one had seen the exchange. Then, with cautious steps, he made his way toward the stables, leaving the chatter and bright lights of the crowd behind. The air grew cooler and quieter as Chuck approached the stables. The faint sounds of the city faded, replaced by the whisper of the wind kicking up small swirls of dust. He leaned against the weathered wooden wall, arms crossed, trying to appear calm, while the minutes dragged by. Checking his watch, he realized the appointed time was drawing near when the sound of approaching footsteps reached his ears. Emerging from the shadows, the same man from earlier stepped into view. This time, he removed his cap, greeting Chuck with a nonchalant nod. "You don't know how much trouble I'm risking just talking to you," the man said, pulling a cigarette from his pocket and lighting it. The smoke spiraled lazily into the air, mingling with the earthy smell of the stables. "But I can't stand seeing a good horse go missing." Chuck took a cautious step forward, his voice betraying his anxiety. "Who are you? What do you know about Pegasus?" The man let out a low chuckle, taking a slow drag from his cigarette. "Call me Jack," he said. "What matters is that I saw the girl. She paid me to bring her to the racetrack this morning, no questions asked. But when I saw the chaos that followed, I knew there was more to the story." He exhaled a plume of smoke, his expression unreadable. "I know where she is now." A spark of hope flared in Chuck's chest, briefly pushing aside the fear and doubt that had plagued him. "Where? Tell me, I need to find Pegasus," he pressed, stepping closer to Jack. Jack held up a hand, as if calming an impatient child. "Easy there, pal. I can't spill it all here. Too many eyes, too many ears. I don't need the cops sniffing around me. But I will say this. She didn't steal him. That horse went with her willingly." He recognized her. Chuck stood stunned, letting the weight of Jack's words sink in. Pegasus had gone with her by choice. The idea made no sense to him. "That's impossible," he muttered to himself. "She had no right to take him." "Maybe not," Jack replied, stubbing out his cigarette against the heel of his boot. "But horses don't care about rights or rules the way people do. I don't know what history they share, but it's clear there's something. If you're serious about finding her, head out to the small ranch on the edge of town. It's off the old road that leads to the river. Hardly anyone goes there since the train tracks shut down. That's where I left her this morning." Chuck stared at Jack, searching his face for any sign of deceit, but the man's expression remained impassive. "Why are you telling me this? You could have just walked away and forgotten all about it." Chuck said, his voice edged with suspicion. "Because I like horses," Jack replied simply, shrugging as though his words were the most natural explanation in the world. "And because I believe that animal doesn't belong on a racetrack. He deserves to be with someone who truly loves him." Without another word, Jack turned and walked back into the shadows, leaving Chuck with more questions than answers. For a moment, Chuck stood frozen, processing the strange exchange. He finally had a lead, a clear direction, but Jack's cryptic words unsettled him. Something about the way Jack spoke of Pegasus made Chuck question whether he truly knew his own horse. There was a past, a story tied to Pegasus that he hadn't uncovered, something that might explain the connection he had noticed between the horse and the girl. After a pause, Chuck pulled out his phone. Instead of dialing 911 as he had done before, he called a police officer he trusted. When the officer answered, Chuck shared the address Jack had given him, but deliberately left out the details of their conversation. "Maybe we have a lead," Chuck said, doing his best to sound confident. "But we need to approach this carefully." "Understood, Chuck," the officer replied. "We'll follow your lead, but remember, safety first. If anything seems off, let us know immediately." Chuck hung up and took a deep breath. He felt like he was on the brink of uncovering something critical, but he also understood that one wrong move could complicate everything further. Driving along a narrow dirt road, Chuck's truck headlights barely pierced the rural darkness, illuminating the winding path and the occasional wooden fence post. The fields flanking the road stretched out into the night, interrupted only by the shadows of looming trees. His mind churned restlessly as he replayed the events leading to this moment. He remembered the first time he had seen Pegasus, a spirited colt in a dusty stable. Though small, Pegasus exuded an energy that seemed to say the world was his for the taking. Chuck had seen potential, not just in the horse, but in himself. Pegasus wasn't just an investment. He was a reflection of Chuck's hopes and dreams. Never would he have imagined that owning Pegasus would lead him here, chasing cryptic clues in the dead of night. But something in Leslie's voice, in the way she had spoken about Pegasus, told Chuck he needed the truth, no matter how unsettling it might be. At the end of the road, faint lights came into view, a house and a barn. Drawing closer, he spotted the silhouettes of police officers waiting by the entrance. They had arrived ahead of him, their postures alert yet steady. One of the officers approached his window. "We haven't gone in yet. Wanted to wait for you," he said, his tone serious but understanding. Chuck nodded, appreciating the gesture. "Let's see what we're dealing with," he replied, trying to sound assured, though a growing knot of anxiety twisted in his stomach. Whatever lay ahead felt like it could unravel everything he thought he knew. The group moved cautiously across the ranch yard, heading toward the barn that loomed in the distance. The silhouettes of several horses stood out against the night, their figures grazing or resting in peaceful oblivion to the tension simmering around them. As they approached, each step seemed amplified in the stillness of the night. The rhythmic crunch of boots on dirt merged with the soft rustling of leaves, creating an almost eerie symphony. Suddenly, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Chuck stiffened, instantly recognizing her. Leslie stood there, a lantern in her hand, its warm glow casting shadows across her face. Her expression was a mix of resolve and sorrow, as though she had been waiting for this moment all along. "I knew you'd come," she said, her voice calm yet carrying an undeniable weight. Chuck stared intently at Leslie, unable to ignore how the soft glow of the barn's lamp cast elongated shadows across her face, making her eyes shine with a fiery intensity. "Leslie," he began, his voice faltering as he struggled to find the right words. I need to understand what's going on here. I need to know why you took Pegasus." Leslie lowered her gaze briefly, as if sorting through her thoughts, before lifting her head to meet his eyes directly. "I didn't take him, Chuck. He came with me because he wanted to," she said, her tone steady. "Because he remembered," she added, her words hanging in the air like a fragile thread binding the moment together. "This is his home. He was born here, raised here. Pegasus isn't just a racehorse. He's my friend, my family." Chuck felt a wave of shock and confusion crash over him. "What are you saying?" "I bought Pegasus legally. I've taken care of him for years. He's more than just a horse to me too," he retorted, his voice hardening slightly, though a flicker of something, perhaps pain, twisted within him as he spoke. "I know," Leslie replied, taking a step closer. "And I didn't come here to steal him away from you. But when I saw him on the track today, when I saw the way he recognized me, I knew there was something I had to do. I don't know if you can understand this, Chuck, but he reminded me that some bonds can't be broken, no matter how much time has passed." Her words left Chuck in stunned silence. For a moment he studied the woman before him and saw something he hadn't noticed before. A profound connection, an undeniable love. It wasn't something that could be faked or bought. There was a raw authenticity in the way she spoke of Pegasus, the way her eyes lit up at the mere mention of his name. This wasn't a thief he was confronting. It was someone who had shared a deep bond with the horse long before he'd entered the picture. "Where is Pegasus now?" he asked finally, his voice softer, almost resigned, though a hint of fear lingered in the question. Leslie smiled faintly, though the sadness in her expression was unmistakable. "He's in the stable, resting. He was tired after everything today, but he's fine. I didn't force him to do anything, Chuck. I just wanted to see him one last time. And he recognized me." Chuck felt the world slow around him. With a nod, he motioned for Leslie to lead the way to the stable. The officers who had been watching from a distance followed discreetly, keeping their presence non-intrusive. When they reached the stable door, Chuck drew a deep breath before pushing it open. There was Pegasus, resting peacefully in a corner, his ears relaxed, his head bowed low. At the sound of the door, he raised his head and looked toward them, letting out a soft snort, as if greeting old friends. Chuck stepped forward slowly, the crunch of hay beneath his boots the only sound. He stopped just in front of Pegasus, extending a trembling hand to stroke the horse's neck. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, feeling an inexplicable wave of relief wash over him. Pegasus was here, safe, unharmed. "I missed you." His hand slid gently over Pegasus's warm, glossy coat as he continued to stroke the horse. The simple act felt both comforting and bittersweet. For all the years he had cared for Pegasus, it suddenly struck him how little he truly knew about the horse's past. It was as though he'd been looking after a stranger without ever realizing it. Yet now, as his fingers traced the curve of Pegasus's neck, he felt both closer to and more distant from the animal than ever before. Leslie stood a few steps back, her face soft in the dim barn light. She seemed to hesitate, as if searching for the right moment to speak. Finally, drawing a deep breath, she stepped closer, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I know you love him, Chuck," she said gently. "I can see it. That's why I'm here talking to you instead of taking Pegasus and leaving without a word. He's been well cared for. I can tell you've loved him. But when I saw him today, I knew he hadn't forgotten where he came from. And I haven't either." Chuck looked up, his hand still resting on Pegasus's neck, his expression a mixture of curiosity and unease. "What are you trying to say, Leslie?" he asked, though a part of him already knew the answer. He had seen it earlier, the way Pegasus had run toward her, without hesitation, without fear. Leslie stood beside Chuck, her gaze fixed on Pegasus, the horse that had been her constant companion in childhood. Her voice softened as she motioned broadly with her hand, as if trying to encompass the entire ranch. "This is his home," she said. "He was born here, took his first steps here. I was just a little girl, but I spent every day with him, feeding him, brushing him, talking to him. We were inseparable." She paused, her eyes glimmering with a sorrow she had kept hidden all night. "When my dad sold him, it felt like I lost a part of myself. But I understood why he did it. We needed the money." Chuck nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling over him. For the first time, he began to grasp the depth of what had happened. Life's hardships often forced people into making decisions that left scars. He realized that Pegasus wasn't just a horse to Leslie. He was family, a living part of her history. "I didn't know," Chuck murmured, his voice subdued. "No one ever told me where Pegasus came from. I thought I was just buying a good horse, nothing more. But now I see I was wrong." He lowered his eyes, his fingers brushing through Pegasus's mane. "If I'd known, maybe I would have done things differently." Leslie offered a faint smile, though a hint of melancholy lingered on her lips. "You couldn't have known," she said gently. "Even if you had, what's done is done." She leaned toward Pegasus, her fingers tracing his muzzle with a tenderness that made Chuck's chest tighten. "All I ever wanted was for him to be happy, and I know he's been happy with you. But deep down, I also know he's always longed to come back here." Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken feelings and unresolved choices. Chuck felt caught in an emotional tug-of-war. Keeping Pegasus meant staying on the path he had meticulously planned, racing, winning, chasing success. Letting him go, however, meant giving Pegasus something money could never buy, the chance to return home, to find freedom. "If I let him stay here," Chuck finally said, the words slipping out before he could second-guess himself. Leslie looked at him in surprise, her eyes wide. She hadn't expected this. "You'd really do that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You'd leave him here?" Chuck hesitated, struggling to put his thoughts into words. "Letting Pegasus go. It's more than just losing a horse for me. It's giving up part of what I've been building all these years. But after today, I can't ignore what I saw. He recognized you, Leslie. He ran to you like he'd been waiting for you all this time." Leslie nodded slowly, biting her lip to hold back tears. "I didn't think you'd say that, Chuck," she admitted. "But if that's how you feel, I promise he'll be safe here. He'll have everything he needs." "I know," Chuck said, with a faint smile that couldn't quite mask the sadness in his eyes. "I know he has a home here, but I can't decide this right now." "Take the time you need," Leslie replied, her tone steady but understanding. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither is Pegasus." She hesitated as if wanting to say more, but instead she simply stroked the horse's head one last time before stepping back. Chuck stood still, watching her retreat. The distance between them seemed to fill with the weight of all the things left unsaid. The barn was quiet, save for the soft sounds of the horses shifting in their stalls, their breaths rhythmic and steady. The dim light from the lantern flickered, casting long, shifting shadows on the wooden walls, as if the night itself had been listening to their conversation. That night, Chuck returned to the modest motel where he was staying. He dropped onto the bed without bothering to turn on the light, his mind swirling with thoughts that refused to settle. He had come here with a clear goal, to find Pegasus and bring him back to the racetrack. But things had become far more complicated than he had ever anticipated. Leslie had shown him an honesty he hadn't expected, a genuine love for Pegasus that had disarmed him entirely. And now he was left with no easy answers, no firm decision in sight. The following morning, Chuck was up before dawn. He knew he couldn't afford to delay any longer. He needed to talk to Leslie and confront the situation, but he wanted to be sure of what he would say. Leaving the motel, he stepped out into the crisp morning air, fragrant with the scent of damp earth and freshly cut grass. The day was clear, and the gentle hues of pink and orange spread across the sky as the sun began its slow ascent. There was a rare tranquility in that moment, as if the world was offering him a brief reprieve to collect his thoughts. When Chuck arrived at the ranch, Leslie was already there, feeding the horses. She looked up as he approached, her lips curling into a faint smile, as though she sensed that something important was about to unfold. Chuck stopped a few feet from her, his expression serious but calm, and, without much preamble, he began to speak. "I've been thinking a lot about all of this," he said, his voice deliberate, each word carefully chosen. "I know how much Pegasus means to you, and I can't deny how much he means to me too. But I don't want us to keep clashing. I want to find a way to do what's right for both of us, and for him." Leslie regarded him with a mix of relief and unease. "What are you saying, Chuck?" she asked softly, her voice trembling slightly as if afraid of what his answer might be. Chuck drew a deep breath, bracing himself for what felt like stepping off a ledge. "I'm taking Pegasus back to the track," he said, watching her reaction closely. "That's his job. It's what I've trained him for, and I know he can excel, but—" He paused, ensuring she was listening. "I want you to know that you'll always have a place in his life. You'll always be welcome to visit him, to spend time with him. I'm not going to take him away from you, Leslie. That wouldn't be right." For a moment, Leslie stood frozen, her face a mixture of emotions: shock, sadness, maybe even a hint of relief. Finally, she nodded slowly, exhaling a deep sigh that seemed to release the weight of her worries. "Thank you, Chuck," she said, her voice steady but filled with sincerity. "I didn't know what to expect, but this is more than I could have hoped for. I just wanted to make sure Pegasus was safe, that he was with someone who cared for him. And now, I know he is." Chuck felt a portion of the tension in his chest ease, but there was still more he needed to say. "What you did," he continued, his tone serious but not harsh, "it was risky. Running off with Pegasus like that, it could have led to serious trouble for you. But I'm not going to press charges or do anything like that. I understand why you did it. You did it out of love for him, and I can't fault you for that." Leslie's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she held them back, offering a small, grateful smile instead. "I didn't have a plan," she admitted, shaking her head slightly. "I just needed to see him, and when he ran to me, I couldn't walk away. I know it was wrong, and I'm sorry for putting you in this position." "It's done now," Chuck said, raising a hand to stop her apologies. "But you've helped me see something I hadn't realized before. Pegasus isn't just a racehorse. He's more than that. And He hesitated, the weight of his own realization settling in. "I've been blind to it until now." They stayed there for a while, wrapped in a silence that no longer felt awkward, but rather like an unspoken understanding. It was as if the words they'd exchanged had built a bridge between two lives that had once run parallel, never intersecting until now. Leslie moved closer to Pegasus, gently stroking his head while whispering something that Chuck couldn't hear. Still, he could see its effect in the way Pegasus's ears twitched, fully tuned to her voice. "I'll keep in touch with you," Chuck said at last, breaking the stillness. "I want you to know how Pegasus is doing, and I want you to visit him anytime you want. I don't want him to feel like he's lost his home, even if he's far from here." Leslie nodded, her eyes shimmering with more than just the tears she'd been holding back. "That would be best for him," she replied, and Chuck knew she wasn't only speaking about Pegasus. "I don't want him to feel lost or confused again, and I know he'll be okay with you." There was a warmth in Leslie's words that touched Chuck deeply. Her voice carried a sincerity so profound it left no room for doubt. He realized she wasn't only speaking about Pegasus, but also about herself, her own hopes and fears. At that moment, Chuck understood that the story unfolding between them wasn't just about a horse finding its way again. It was about two lives reconnecting in unexpected ways. That same afternoon, Chuck made a decision. Simple, yet meaningful. He would invite Leslie to join him and Pegasus on the journey back to the city. Until now, all their interactions had been fleeting, tense, and marked by the uncertainty of what lay ahead. This time, he wanted it to be different. He wanted Leslie to share the journey so that Pegasus could feel both their presence, a living bridge between the two worlds they had known. When Chuck proposed the idea, Leslie blinked, surprised, as if unsure whether she'd heard him right. "You want me to come with you?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "To the city?" "Yes," Chuck replied, his smile needing no further explanation. "I want you with us. I think it's best. For Pegasus, for you, and for me. I don't want it to feel like he's leaving something behind." Leslie didn't know what to say at first. She had prepared herself to say goodbye to Pegasus, expecting him to return to the world of racing as if none of this had ever happened. This invitation was something she hadn't anticipated. As the idea settled in her mind, she felt a sense of relief filling her chest. "All right," she said finally, nodding. "I'll come." The ride back to the city was peaceful, punctuated by those quiet, intimate moments that make time feel special. Chuck drove the truck while Leslie sat in the back with Pegasus. She had insisted on staying close to him, stroking his head every so often, and whispering things only the two of them could understand. Pegasus seemed calmer than ever, his ears constantly swiveling to catch Leslie's voice. Occasionally, he turned his head to look at her with deep, dark eyes that radiated a tranquility Chuck hadn't seen in the horse for a long time. As the scenery shifted from open fields to increasingly crowded streets, Chuck found himself glancing in the rearview mirror. He watched Leslie and Pegasus together and couldn't help but feel part of something larger than he had imagined when this journey began. His thoughts drifted to the years he'd spent chasing success, focused on races, the pressure to win, and being on his own. Now, it all seemed so far away. When they arrived in the city, Chuck made sure Leslie felt welcome at the stable where Pegasus would stay. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, comfortable, and run by people who knew Pegasus well enough to understand his needs. Introducing Leslie to the stable hands, Chuck made her role clear. "This is Leslie," he said. "She's a friend, someone important to Pegasus. Please treat her with the same respect you give me." And with that, the lines that had once separated their lives blurred even further, as if the bridge they had built was now strong enough to hold not just them, but all the weight of their shared hopes and unspoken promises. In the days that followed, Leslie stayed close to Pegasus, easing into life in the city without complaint. Yet Chuck could see traces of longing in her eyes, a quiet ache for the wide, open fields of the ranch she'd left behind. Pegasus, on the other hand, seemed revitalized. During their training sessions, Chuck noticed a newfound ease in the horse's stride. Gone was the tension that once gripped him before a race. Pegasus still possessed the fierce spirit of a competitor, but now there was an unmistakable calm about him, as if he had discovered a balance that had eluded him before. A few days before the next race, Chuck found Leslie in the stable, brushing Pegasus's coat with gentle precision. "How do you think he's doing?" he asked, feigning seriousness, though a smile played at the corners of his lips. Leslie looked up, her expression softening into a smile of her own. "Happy," she said without hesitation. "I see it in him, Chuck. He's happy. I think he knows he's not alone anymore." "I think so too," Chuck replied with a nod. After a moment of thoughtful silence, he added, "You know, it's made me realize I've been looking at all of this the wrong way for so long." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "I wanted Pegasus to win, to be the best, but I never really considered what he needed to feel right. And now I see it wasn't just about training or the perfect track. He needed you, Leslie." Chuck's words lingered in the air, and Leslie felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in a long time. "I just want him to be okay, wherever he is," she murmured, her voice almost a whisper. "And if being here with you is what makes him happy, then I'm happy too." Race day arrived with its usual mix of anticipation and tension. This time, Leslie stood beside Chuck, watching as Pegasus prepared. The electric energy of the event buzzed around them, but Pegasus seemed untouched by it, standing steady and composed. When his turn came to take the track, Chuck and Leslie watched as he trotted with effortless grace, his movements exuding confidence, as if for those fleeting moments the world truly belonged to him. And when the race began, Chuck knew he'd made the right decision. Pegasus wasn't running alone anymore. He was surrounded by those who cared for him, and that gave him a strength no training could ever replicate. Pegasus ran, and he ran well. But what Chuck and Leslie would remember most wasn't the race itself. It was the way Pegasus looked after crossing the finish line. He approached the fence where Leslie waited, lowering his head so she could stroke him. In that moment, an unspoken bond passed between them, a quiet promise that, no matter where life took them, they would always have each other. In the months that followed, subtle yet profound changes unfolded. Leslie began visiting the stables more frequently, and Chuck found in her a partner who understood horses in a way he was only beginning to appreciate. Before long, they started discussing the possibility of a partnership, combining the ranch's resources with the racing world to create opportunities for more horses to find homes. It was a way to give other horses the same freedom Pegasus had found. And so, one chapter closed as another began. Chuck came to understand that true worth wasn't found in trophies or accolades, but in the care and love poured into every step of the journey. Leslie reconnected with a part of her past she thought she'd lost. And Pegasus found a place where his old story and his new one could merge into something extraordinary. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Chuck, Leslie, and Pegasus stood together in an open field, far from the city's noise and bright lights. Pegasus ran freely, his mane streaming in the wind, while Chuck and Leslie watched from a distance, sharing a quiet smile. "Look at him go," Chuck said, his voice filled with a deep satisfaction. "It's like the whole world belongs to him." "It does," Leslie replied, her voice full of pride. Because in the end, it wasn't about where they were. It was about who they were with. And in that moment they knew that whatever the future held, there would always be a place for them, a place where hearts could run as free as Pegasus, unafraid and unbound, with the wind as their only companion and the promise of a tomorrow filled with new adventures. The story of Chuck, Leslie, and Pegasus was one of transformation, connection, and the quiet beauty of finding where you truly belong. What begins as a simple search for a lost horse evolves into a profound journey of emotional connection and responsibility. Chuck, who initially sees Pegasus as nothing more than a prized racehorse, gradually learns to value the animal's well-being and happiness over its ability to win trophies. Through his encounter with Leslie, Chuck comes to understand that Pegasus isn't merely an asset, but a living being with feelings and deep bonds. Leslie, on the other hand, embodies unconditional love and a longing for what has been lost. Her courage in asserting her unique connection to Pegasus proves that true relationships never fade. Together, Chuck and Leslie find common ground, placing Pegasus's welfare above all else. This journey offers an invaluable lesson. Material success and achievements are hollow without compassion and understanding. True happiness lies in mutual respect and the freedom to live authentically. The story serves as a poignant reminder to cherish meaningful connections and to care for what we love with devotion and empathy. If this story resonated with you, feel free to like and share it. Drop a comment to let us know how it inspired you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and guide you in every step of your journey.